Sometimes, when you're using web workers, you might want to pass a complex object from the main page into the worker in order to tell it what to do. And likewise, the web worker might want to pass back a complex object as the result. So we're going to see how to do that in this lesson. The web page is called object_echo.html, and there are 3 bits of information that we want to pass in to the worker. There's an integer that indicates how many replies we want to get back from the worker. So I'll type in a number such as 5. We can also specify the gap that we'd like to have between replies, so something like 2000 milliseconds. And when I click Start Worker, it posts a message to the worker, and the message is an object. And the object contains 3 properties. The first property is a string, such as this, hi from worker1. The second property is an integer called num_replies. And the third part is an integer called gap. So what I do, and we'll see the code for this in a moment, I create an object containing those 3 properties, and I pass that object as the parameter into the post_message function. Likewise, the response that comes back from the web worker is also an object. It contains a message, which is the original message converted to uppercase, an integer to tell me which reply this is, and an integer to tell me how many there are going to be altogether. So we'll see how you can pass objects into a web worker and back to the web page as part of the communication process. So let's have a look at the code. The code for this example is in 2 files. There's a file called object_echo.html, and the background worker is in a JavaScript file called object_echo_worker.js. I've copied both of these files into IIS inetpub www root folder, so it doesn't really matter what web server you're using, but make sure that you copy the files from the project folder into your web server folder to run this example. Okay, so let's have a look at the HTML page first of all, and I'm just going to skim down to the bottom to show what the actual content of the page looks like. So there's a text box where the user can say how many replies they'd like to have. So that's a text box called num_replies. And there's a second text box where you can say what the gap you'd like to have between the replies. So the gap may be something like 2000. And then the 2 buttons which allow the user to start and to cancel workers. Plus finally a text area where it displays the results that come back. So that's what the web page looks like. And this is the initialization code that runs when the page first loads. So we just simply set up handlers for the 2 buttons and set up some global variables just to make it easier for me to access the text boxes and text areas in my script. So let's take a look at the top of the script now, the top of the page. So here on line 22, I've set up some global variables, and then on line 29, this is the function that will be called when I click the start button. So most of this is fairly routine. We check whether the browser supports web workers, and if it does support web workers, we create a new web worker, and we tell it which JavaScript file to run, and we handle the message event and the error event as you would normally. I store each worker in an array so that I can cancel them one by one if I want to after I've started them. The most important part is on lines 50 to 53. This shows how you can pass an object into a worker. You call the post_message function, and as you can see here, I've passed in an object. The object can be as complicated or as simple as you want. So in this case, the object has 3 properties: message, num_replies, and gap. The message is a string such as this, hi from worker1. And the num_replies is whatever value you entered into the first text box, like 5. And then gap is whatever value I entered into the second text box, like 2000. So this object will be passed in to the background worker. Now we need to see how to process that data in the background worker. So let's take a look at object_echo_worker.js. And if I just scroll down to the bottom of the file, you can see here at the bottom, it handles the incoming message from the main page. The message handler is here. The message handler shows how you can extract parts of an object from the incoming message. You say e.data as usual, and then you drill in to the part of the object that you want. So that would be the message such as hi from worker1, and we convert it to uppercase and we store it in a global variable here, so we can refer to it later. I've set up some global variables at the top of the file here. Also, we get the num replies field from the incoming data, so that'll be 5, and we'll store that in a global variable, and the gap as well. We store that in a global variable as well. So we've captured the data and stored it locally, and then here it sets up an interval. The interval will call this function several times. So the doReply function is going to be called repeatedly in a gap of, for example, 2000 milliseconds. So let's have a look at the doReply function. Each time that function is called, it'll post a message back to the main page, and the message itself will be an object. So we call post message, and we pass back an object to the main page. And the object also has a message property, so that would be hi from worker1, in uppercase, remember, according to what we set up down here. And then reply number, so this will indicate reply 1, reply 2, reply 3. I've got a counter here that keeps track of how many replies we've sent back. And then the total number of replies is something like 5. Okay, so this object will contain all the information that we want to post back to the main page. And then just when we finish, just to be on the safe side, on lines 17 to 19, after we've sent back the appropriate number of replies, like 5, we need to cancel the interval so that it doesn't keep on going. So call the clear interval function to stop it from repeating the process any further. Okay, one last thing to think about then. What happens when we post an object back to the main page? Let's see how that's handled in object_echo.html. So that'll be in the onMessage function. The onMessage function will handle the data posted back from the background worker, and as you can see here, it uses a similar approach. e.data is the object passed back from the worker, and it had a message property, and a reply number property, and a total replies property, like so. So we've seen how you can create an example which uses web workers passing complex objects potentially between the main page and the worker itself in order to communicate rich data between the two parties.